Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at, ladies and gents. I am Kurik Isagami, your resident Tinkerer and Medarotter, and Imagineer, we have a problem. For 2.5 years now, coming up thereabout, we have greatly and immensely enjoyed Medarot S and everything that it has offered, especially as a way to breathe new life into the Medarot community that has remained relatively stagnant in recent years prior to Medarot S's release. But ever since the second anniversary, we've had problems and a lot of concerns. And as concerned members of the community, I wanted to take a moment to bring some of these concerns to light, in hopes that maybe someone in the higher ups will recognize this or even address these issues. But going forward in this, let me go ahead and take a moment and kind of provide a little context to those that have not quite understood what exactly is going on, or is asking themselves, why is Medarot S suddenly not doing well? Is it failing? Did it bomb? Did it break? Well, not quite. It's still a very immensely popular game, for sure. But it's riddled with a lot of problems that a lot of veteran players and supporters of the community really feel have concerns that need addressed in terms of the game's future, given that the game has been going for 2.5 years strong. Now, for this context, I first started about a week and a half ago hosting a survey on my Twitter channel asking what is your general opinion of Medarot S, and of the things that you think that need to be rebalanced or fixed, what do you feel needs to be addressed the most? This poll of mine that I hosted, which again just asked for the general opinion, just ended earlier today. So I'm able to finally compile the results of that, and oh boy, how do I put this? They, not quite as promising as I hoped. I was honestly in part hoping that there would still be a fair number of people that said that the game was still very good, but as you see here, that's not quite the case. To kind of explain the context of my answers here, since Twitter only lets a certain number of characters per answer, basically, as you see here, I asked, what is your overall opinion of Medarot S? The first answer in top part, at 7.8% of total votes in this poll that participated, said the game is very good. This basically translated to roughly, there is very little, if anything, wrong with the game, everything is working as it should, everything is well balanced, if anything, just a couple minor quality of life fixes which should do the trick and we're good. 7.8% of people said the game was perfectly fine. 35.8% of people said the game could be better. That means that the game is still very, very good, on track for greatness, just a couple of bugs here and there, some rebalance issues that need looked at, but otherwise still very much so in the higher end. A staggering 41.3%, as you see here, said the game needs improvement. That translates roughly to, the concept is there, we've been enjoying it, but there's a lot of broken parts, mechanics, or a lot of things that need rebalanced or looked at because it's hindering overall gameplay and enjoyment of the game. And then last but not least, 15.1% said the game was very bad. As in, to translate, well, actually, I don't even need to translate this one. This pretty much, need I say more situation. The results here are kind of staggering, honestly. The game's been out for almost just about 2.5 years now at this point, and with this kind of, with this kind of outlook, that's very concerning. And as a dedicated Medarotter myself with this, especially on the Western Front, this does also give me concern too, because I want to see the Medarot community thrive and rebirth, especially here on the Western Front, but with poll results like this, even among the JP community, I'm a little fearful. So the question ultimately is, what happened? What caused people to think like this? And I've been collecting a lot of opinions and feedback from friends of mine, new and old, in the Medarot community, and we've compiled, and of their opinions, and of their comments and everything they've told me, I've compiled a list of concerns, pretty much just the summation, essentially, of the biggest points that both the Western and the Japanese communities feel is lacking from Medarot S that could make it even better. And primarily to start off that list are cut content and cut corners. These are things that people had noticed and pointed out from games prior that were present, but later cut, either in a later title or even just outright excluded from Medarot S for weirdly unknown reasons, even though they perfectly had the code and the files for them on hand. The first of which here, as you see, is a category called sub-skills. This and a lot of the elements from this list in particular are all elements that came from Medarot 9, which a lot of people in both the Western and Japanese communities very fondly look at as a very well-balanced game, both gameplay-wise and mechanically. Now, to explain briefly, sub-skills were basically a second alternative to a part skill that you could select at will whenever the Medarot's turn came to be. Some of these skills can be also toggled back and forth freely whenever your turn comes about, which gave even more flexibility with team builds and team comps, because sub-skills could comp for skills that you can't normally put in a team or fit in. A lot of the sub-skills in particular that were mentioned, first of which, as you see here, is aim, which basically allowed certain shooting attacks to pick and choose what kind of part that they wanted to target and attack on the enemy at varying levels of success. This even meant, in Medarot 9, that you could chance a headshot. Now granted, that headshot only gave you a 12% chance to even land the hit successfully, but it was still a chance to land it all the same if you felt lucky. In addition to this, the only major drawback to using the aim sub-skill, in contrast to it as a conventional shooting skill, is that it did lower your heat and cool stats just a little bit to comp for the extra prep time and cooldown needed to prepare for a more dedicated strike. Inversely of this, Berserk also was a sub-skill, and basically what this meant was certain conventional melee attacks that were not AoEs could actually be converted into AoEs at will with this sub-skill at extra damage, at the cost of, once again, lowering your heat and cool slightly, and also rendering you unable to dodge or defend until your turn had ended, thus adding a little extra utility to AoE skills, which we currently in Medarot S see as very effectively useless or very limited. Another sub-skill brought up was Crossfire. Now this one would be a little bit confusing, and this one I understand to a point, because we have since in recent months gotten Crossfire set and release back from much earlier games. But to explain the Crossfire sub-skill, basically think of it as a team skill. And what this meant was an ally would set up himself in battle stance and ready, waiting for another ally to come behind him and take their turn. Upon their ally completing their turn on a target, the ally in waiting would then attack in tandem with their ally for basically a 1-2 hit consecutively, and landing 2 hits on the same enemy back to back. Of course, at the cost of lower heat and cool. An example of this would include my boy Crotogil in Medarot 9. Both of his arms, if I recall correctly, had Crossfire sub-skills, which made him a fantastic team player and a really unique way to factor in team unity across the build, especially if you want to knock out bots quickly but can't afford to really waste turns to do so. And last but not least, as you see here, anti-air and anti-sea. I really don't have to go into detail on this because we know very much so how niche these skills are, but if I were to tell you that these were skills that could be toggled willingly on your turn, would you believe me? Basically put, this would mean bots like, for instance, Lady Jet, who had Brake Hammer on both her arms, could convert her parts between Brake Hammer or anti-air at will whenever her turn came to be. In addition to sub-skills, another element that was cut out from Medarot 9 and not used in S is called Silent Leader. Basically, and as we know in Medarot S, we don't know who the enemy leader is until we KO them, which can make things for a little bit of a gamble if you want to finish fights quickly, especially in fights where you really don't think you could very easily survive extended fights. And with the Silent Leader, you actually had a little bit easier of a time managing this, as basically all you had to do was damage the head part of the enemy leader to flush them out. And from that moment forward, the enemy leader was made known and pointed out and revealed for the entire duration of the fight. This meant you didn't have to go after the leader if you wanted, but if you wanted to kind of finish the fight quickly, you knew who to target. Now, the one thing that did carry over from 9 into S with this element was the fact that the leader was, much like an S still, was randomized. This means that at this point, you had to be able to choose wisely who the enemy leader would be if you wanted to try to end the fight quickly, or just kind of put a toe out in the water and make sure that you knew who you were targeting. Defense functions also had a very largely different element in Medarot 9 at the point. At that point, upon being attacked, the enemy could choose what part they wanted to defend with to tank the blow if they were being attacked, or they could chance even evading the blow, at the cost, if they failed the evade check, to take the full damage of the blow up front with no way to defend it or even ignore damage or reduce it. Transpart was also a unique function also from 9, which meant that the team leader at any given point in the battle could trade one part out for a standby part in waiting once per fight, and only the enemy leader was allowed to do this. And then another element here of the last couple is comboing skills, another unique element to 9. This basically meant that you could combo more than one part skill at a time on your turn at the cost of halving or thirding your overall mobility, or heat cool in this case, in order to prep for the onslaught. Which meant, instead of using just your basic rifle once you got to the command line, you could use your Medabee's rifle, Gatling, and missile all at once in a non-stop onslaught toward the enemy. At the cost, he would basically cool down at a snail's crawl because he has to take much longer to cool down after using so many attacks at once. And then last but not least, as you see here with the cut content for at least this list, is Metaforce charge time. This basically meant in Medarot 9, you could choose if you wanted to charge very quickly, a regular charge time, or charge longer. And depending on which one you picked, you actually had the opportunity to either charge quickly or even spend more time to charge Metaforce at the cost of sitting there on the lineup just a little bit longer than normal. Now, in addition to these elements here that have been cut up to this point, there is something else in particular that the community has been rather hard pressed and annoyed that was not re-implemented in Medarot S from the most recent title, which again kind of cites, you have the files, why not use them? And allow me to show you this here. Custom walking animations basically per leg type, and bipeds even had multiples in this case. In addition to these, the custom meta change animations that we saw in 8 and 9 also were cut, likely due to save space or time, I really can't say, but they were cut basically entirely, and we only had just the default running animations from 8, which a lot of people were rather unsatisfied with. With this moment as well, I do want to take a moment and say thank you, Sadant Voiro, if you are watching this, for the footage and collecting all that for me. You are an absolute MVP for collecting this. In addition to anyone that is watching, if you are looking for content related to Medarot 9 or Medarot R, as he started doing, definitely give him a follow on Twitter, as he is constantly recording and releasing video footages of those files and those in gameplay to further reach out to the Medarot community with this. But with this, it kind of asks, they have the files, they have the animations, it's all carryover from previous titles. Why aren't they using them? It wouldn't be that hard theoretically to apply them. So why were they cutting back on all the content if it were things that made things more engaging and unique? And it wasn't just cut content either that the community is upset about. It's also some very massively and absurdly obvious game imbalances that need looked at in order to rebalance and make the game more engaging. First of which, as you see here, and I did mention already, and I mentioned this in pretty much any of my Rebalance analytics, AoE skills are effectively useless, because they spread the damage across all the parts evenly, which makes your final damage inconsistent and very difficult to use effectively, especially for bots such as, say, Yogg Spider, who even has Power Hammer. It's very difficult to use him effectively as a pure set, because both of his arms are AoEs, which means the damage is going to be spread and not used conventionally as any other melee part. Boss type and collaboration bots, I've seen this one mentioned a lot of times, both on the community front here on the Western front and the JP front. Boss bots and collab bots have become absurdly broken in recent, offering brand new skills that make them very, very hard to pass up on, because they would very quickly and very easily shake up the meta. This especially applies to float-based legs. In particular here, just a couple examples of float-based legs people have complained about. The Goddess-type Artemis, GDS-01. She has the Super Armor leg ability, which makes her immune to paralyzed ailments, She has an evade stat basically akin to flight legs and resist stats akin to tank legs, and she's also one of the fastest float legs in the game currently. Spinag, one of the fastest float legs in the game, basically hands down, and above average stats everywhere else. And then Grain, of course, when he transforms, high everything. There's really no easy way to explain this or put it in detail. It's just high everything, which makes him a floating fortress that's very hard to kill. Now granted, Grain does have a particularly glaring weakness that's easy to exploit if you're quick, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that his stats are absurdly above average, even for a boss type, which punishes a lot of players that either could not collect Grain or decide to skip out on him due to trying to collect resources. There has also been a massively obvious meta creep in leg types. Now this has been a little obvious for a while in my opinion, but it was at least balanced to a point where I could forgive it. But in recent, I just really can't anymore. Newer bipeds that are coming and releasing soon, in recent, are boasting mobility speeds basically akin to wheeled legs, and resist and evade stats akin to other leg types, which made using all of them over bipeds worthwhile. And because these bipeds are having all these high stats, it makes it basically worthless and completely out of the question to use the other leg types for anything whatsoever. Tank legs, I've gone over this before and I'll go over it again, in the way S operates is effectively worthless in every shape and form, because they have poor mobility, they cannot evade at all, and in most cases, even if they have a really good ability, such as say Rhino Rush with super armor, even the leg ability can't forgive or justify using them because you just can't. You can't dodge, you don't move very fast, you'd be half dead by the time you reach the line. And this ties into the next point, mobility trumps all, and this ultimately hinders the freedom and the ultimate essence of mix and match of Medarot. Because at this point, there is a very obvious meta, because if you're not fast, you're effectively dead. And then last but not least with this point, there's a lot of leg abilities that require you to charge Metaforce to activate. And in a game of competitive meta like this, you can't afford to spend a turn charging Metaforce just to get that ability, because you'll be dead by the time you cool down from it, because someone's already on your back targeting you. And then even as if the leg skill meta creep wasn't bad enough, even most part skills have a meta creep to a point. Now in many cases this also kinda curbs itself over time, but it's still very obvious and hard to tell at first, and hard to counter at first glance. A lot of ailments are entirely worthless and not worth the investment. For instance, DOTs, Fire and Melt for instance. They're effectively useless because they don't deal enough damage over time to warrant and justify using them in a team build, because especially with elements such as say Stat Cleanse, where this becomes effectively useless. In addition to this, this also hinders even stun ailments like Shock and Freeze or Thunder Shot and Freeze Shot, because again, Stat Cleanse makes them impossible to use. Traps and setup skills basically in general are also almost never used at all, because they just can't be fit into a team feasibly. The only exception to this is Disturbance, which hinders all non-attacking skills, and for this very reason it is absurdly broken, because anyone that is using a healer or even Stat Cleanse is basically crippled and made entirely useless because they can't do anything whatsoever, and even leg skills like Trap Buster can't remove this, or even Trap Clear can't remove this, because Disturbance is already trumping that action by priority. Support skills also are very rarely used as in general too, aside from maybe one or two at best, and makes it effectively useless to use them in the team. And then last but not least, there's a lot of parts that are under 3 stars, even if they may be truly fantastic parts to make use of, they're just too expensive to raise. And as a result of this, they're almost never raised past a certain point, and it hinders ultimate team freedom and building, because you have parts you can use, but you can't raise them because they're too expensive. In addition to all of these, a lot of other points that were brought up, the game in general has been having a very consistent trend towards gearing towards very heavy pay-to-win status, which it never ever had prior to, even if you were to compare it to events, say, a year ago at this point. It's a very obvious trend, and a lot of players have picked up on this. Events require much more grinding than before and are difficult toward new players. So a lot of players that joined recently or just started picking it up can't participate in these events because they're under-leveled, and they can't even start the first couple levels because they don't have anything ready to go. Now, granted, new players, of course, putting up with this, you are going to have that power struggle to a point early on. But the way the events have been going, the community has been pointing out very obvious, it's hard for new players even just to learn the game. There's also too much emphasis on gacha bots with a lot of these recent events too, because you either get you have to get the highest bonus possible if you even want to get a bonus payout at all in these events, because you're getting a noticeably lower payout per event whenever you complete runs to earn points. That can either be for ticket-based or percentage-based milestone events. In addition to this also, and this is a whole nother topic in and of itself, this already massively excludes a lot of the international community, which has made themselves very obviously well known and evident, because we're already struggling as it is to play this game as a whole, and events like this that become very grind heavy, or even in points where we can't even pay for things in the game, we can't even play, or we're struggling to play because we can't do things that they want us to do, and we're playing on an already limited method as it is. The second anniversary event, oh boy, this is a topic in and of itself. That has been looked on very openly in a very negative outlook, because the rewards that you were going to earn from that required immense amounts of grinding that no one really wanted to do or could justify using, and as a result, everybody got punished for it. Anyone who completed it, anyone who didn't, and a lot of events ever since the second anniversary have ultimately followed kind of the same trend, even to an earlier point, even to a lesser extent, where they become more grind heavy and you get less of a reward payout. Now, I can harp on this longer, but to Imagineer's credit in this case, I can also understand to a point where they're trying to balance out reward payout per time of the event, of dungeon event run, so that you don't complete the event in, say, 3 days and then never touch it again. I understand that. From a dev perspective, I'll give you that one to a point, but it still feels like the level of payout versus effort is still missing. In addition, and not just that, with the new tune-up mechanic, it's very, very grind heavy with no major payout or reward that even makes going after it worthwhile. Now, Imagineer has stated this week that they are going to postpone releasing this mechanic further while they revamp it. So this will be potentially curbed to a point, and this point could potentially be brought off. But it's still worth bringing up because of the general opinion that I've seen just in the 2 weeks that it's been live with the Ghost in the Shell collaboration that has recently and since come to an end with its rerun. A lot of the Japanese community as well has reached out to me and mentioned that they are very fearful over Medarot's future because of all these imbalances and cut content just evident in S alone. Because the two previous studios that were in charge of Medarot's game dev in the past, Rocket Company and Delta Arts, who designed their games such as DS, 7, 8, 9, Duel Girls Mission, they have since been closed and absorbed into Imagineer, so they no longer exist anymore. So at this point, the community is kind of fearful because there's been no major heads up or update, or even a hint that Imagineer has been looking at possibilities of other game devs to pick up even a future Medarot 10, which we would love to play, and we absolutely will, but we feel that it would be cut content and it just wouldn't be put to its greatest potential because of all the cut content and the concerns people are having just with Medarot S alone. So as you see here, there are a lot of concerns that we've been having with Medarot S, not just on the Western front, but these were opinions voiced to me personally by the Japanese community themselves on the home front that have been saying these need fixed. So as a result, and with a lot of brainstorming through my survey and even speaking with a lot of members privately on their own, what should we do from here? How could we fix a lot of these imbalance problems that are very ludicrously evident and need fixed? Well, we as the community feel we've come up with a couple results and a couple suggestions that we could use to fix this, so that these problems can go away and be rebalanced. The first point we had here that we wanted to mention was to look to previous games' experience and mechanics and look at things that people liked and that worked. I did harp a lot on the fact that a lot of people said that the content from 9 should be brought back in, and even though implementing it immediately all at once is absolutely out of the question, I'll understand that. A lot of them were saying Medarot 9, and a lot of the community all very fondly looks at Medarot 9 as a very well-made and well-balanced game. So a lot of people are saying, look at Medarot 9 and how they handled a lot of their stat spread and a lot of their mechanics. Look to that and expound off of that, because what S is doing works, but it's not, but it's hindering on the ultimate freedom that is the essence of Medarot. Mix and match using parts you want, not dedicated by a meta that, you know, similar to Game Freak and Pokemon in this case, where in competitive you only see a certain handful of Pokemon. In competitive PvP, people have complained that they see the exact same bots and the exact same parts repeatedly, and if you're not using those, you may as well not even compete, because you're not going to be able to keep up with them. Another thing that I've seen very, very commonly in the community that needs to be rebalanced is to make the rarer and more expensive materials easier to obtain to a point. Pink Cyplasmium in particular, which is used to limit break and ascend parts 3-star and higher, is exceptionally difficult to obtain, especially for free-to-players, because you can only get it through special events and through pulling duplicates in the gacha, which is still seen more as a compensation or participation prize more than an actual resource. So a lot of people suggested that you could take maybe even the blue Cyplasmium and implement a mechanic that allows you to convert blue into pink, even if it's a very expensive way to do so, such as say 1 million or 10 million coin credits to convert 10 Cyplasmium. That, I believe, people would see as absolutely worth the time and make farming a lot of dungeons for those materials more worth it. A lot of people have also complained that real-time and Meta League PvPs have too much effort and not enough reward to justify grinding up to legend or even higher ranks every week, because it's just not worth it. The bots that they put in the PvP exclusive gacha are one thing, sure, but you're not getting the tickets or the rubies enough to even justify wanting to shoot for them. And as a result, a lot of people have not even been bothering with PvP because they just don't see it as worth their time. A lot of people also mentioned, rerunning books, or making it easier to collect books for the Medarotters, because those also are a rather difficult material to obtain over time. But something else that I'd like to personally consider would be maybe even rerunning previous events and previous rewards, not necessarily towards the behest and benefit of veteran players, but to the behest of the new players and the rookie Medarotters that missed out on these. There have been a lot of bots in previous months and previous weeks that have been fantastic. Medals, bots, Medarotters, fantastic elements and resources you could get for free, no less, that new players I feel are kind of being punished on because they joined, quote-unquote, joined late, and they don't have access to this. I can't tell you how many times a lot of people who collected Particle, the Archangel type for instance, have asked me how to build Particle because they missed out on the Phoenix Medal, which was basically tailor-fit for her, because it was an event reward and they didn't get it. And it's made things very difficult. Now, and I can understand to a point that it's not something that you can do willy-nilly, but even just rerunning one every once in a while, it not only would be a benefit to new players, but it would also give veteran players a chance to recoup more so, and kind of give them a skip week or a break week to just focus on other things without having to play an event and still do everything else like their dailies on the side. Now this one's more of a nitpick more than anything else, but we do also feel, not just us here on the Western Front especially, but also the Japanese fronts feel that the need that for international players to make purchases, to make in-app purchases, needs to be implemented. For some reason, mysteriously, when the Ghost in the Shell rerun collaboration event started, I found myself unable to make purchases for some odd reason that I still can't explain, when for the previous year and a half or so, I was able to do so very freely, as of course money and budget allowed. And with me basically being a breakdown channel, I felt more of a need to have to collect a lot of these bots just so I can kind of experience how they work and tell people honestly how I feel and if they're worth actually going after. And I can't do that anymore now because I've, for some reason, been effectively blocked from making purchases. But if they were able to open this up, this would allow a lot of international players to continue supporting the community, even with the already limited methods that we have. Now, to Imagineer's credit, however, there have been a lot of quality of life, fixes and changes done in recent that have been very, very nice, and they have been very openly welcomed. And just to touch on that as well, to Imagineer's credit, they have been doing a lot of things right with the game. Now, up to this point for the last 30 minutes or so, it's been a long ride, hope you buckled up, got a snack, I've been harping on a lot of things that people said are missing or cut or need fixed from Medarot S. Now, let me take a moment just to kind of highlight what they've been doing right, because Imagineer for their credit, has been doing a lot of really good things with this game as a media outlet for the Medarot franchise as a whole. For this reason, just to start, they've been very consistent with new weekly content with very little recycling. There have been reruns of previous bots, but there have also been very few weeks where there's nothing to do, and they always give Medarotters and players something to work on or something to play with or do whenever there's nothing to do, like an event or a collaboration that's ongoing, which is very, very good. They also implemented a lot more Ori meta contests, which allow for fans to submit fan designs under specific motifs that could be implemented as official models later down the line. They also have been re-debuting older bots that have never ever seen 3D before with fresh kits and new faces, which also is very, very openly welcomed in this case, as ways to kind of increase that roster for that eventual Medarot 10 that might come down the pike, so we have the models available. And then in addition, they're also still making brand new models on top of this. So they're keeping content very fresh, which is very, very good for a gacha game in particular, especially at Imagineer's benefit in this case. And for a 2.5-year lifetime of Medarot S thus far, aside from the concerns we brought up, I'd say they've been doing fantastic. It's been a very well-running game. Very little, honestly, has been brought up in terms of controversy that has hindered the game's overall spread or performance, which makes it a very good running game even for a gacha, which already has a rather controversial mindset, and viewpoint to it as it is. Medarot also has made a lot of new friends in very, very high places in recent, even just in the last year and a half alone when they started doing collaborations. That includes Digimon, Ghost in the Shell, Ultraman, Rockman.exe, the Omega Sisters. They've made a lot of friends in high places, and honestly, that's been utterly fantastic in every way, shape, and form, as a way for the Medarot community and its franchise owners to spread out to other IPs and even get other ideas from them on what they could do to make their game better. They've also been exploring new functions of appealing to the community as a whole. This includes more merch, acrylic stands, model kits, the Mini 112 mini toys as another example. They've even introduced VTubers as other ways to implement and release more content whenever the weekly episodes have not been ongoing. Cheerful Bunny, Shushu Pop, Leah Lila, and they also release content on the semi-regular on the channel. So it's not like they're a once in a blue moon thing. They're basically their own standalone thing on the channel too, which has been utterly fantastic as a way to reach out to the VTuber community in this case. And then let's also not forget that Imagineer has had a lot of struggles as well on the front as well, not just with Medarot S, but that's also hindered a lot of endeavors, including localization, and that is the trademark dispute over the EU name of Medabots over in the European region. Just a brief update on that. Kevin is still unfortunately not playing nice with the lawsuit, and he is still not obeying or adhering to court orders, which have basically at this point said, you need to hand back the trademark, you have no case. But it seems that he's still hell-bent on the fact that he believes there is, despite the fact that his coin value and his progress on the game, quote-unquote, that he's been working on is an absolute shambles. There is no value to the coin whatsoever. The community themselves in that area have been basically at each other's throats, and the devs, especially in this case, Kevin, Chaptum, whoever else has been working on it, they're basically playing a death game at this point of chicken as to who can basically out the other and out-scam one another without the other one without themselves losing money over it. And it's an absolute train wreck. So it still kind of baffles me that they still think they can keep this up. But with that being said, things are still looking up for Imagineer on that front, even with just a brief update. But unfortunately, it is a lot of legal jargon, which we really have no say in and really no understanding of how that works. So really only time can tell. And Imagineer, we are rooting for you here on the Western and the JP fronts, that you will see this to the end and reclaim the trademark that is rightfully yours. But aside with all this, I feel this does very adequately cover all of, if not all of the concerns that we as the Medarot community as a whole, not just the Western community, not just the Japanese community, but as a whole, entirely across the globe, have felt Medarot S is falling short on and really could do better. And the reason why we're bringing these up is because we love Medarot and Medarot S so much, we don't want to see it fail. It's been going 2.5 years strong, and we're absolutely proud of the game for that. But but with these kind of behaviors and concerns that we have, we don't want to see it fail when it could easily keep going. So that being said, I do appreciate you guys for stopping by and taking a moment to listen. I understand this has been just a little bit of a long run and a long-winded talk and discussion, but this is essentially a way to kind of voice a lot of the concerns people have had in terms of what Medarot S has been doing in recent, so that it can catch itself early, make up from it, and do better going forward, because we absolutely know it can. That being said, if you'd like to know more, you can follow us below on Facebook at the Medarot News Network page or the Metabots Forever communities on there. You can also join our Project Rising Beetle Discord in the link provided and in the comments below. As for the international community, it's primarily Western based, but mostly international as well. To join together, talk about Medarot, anything related to it, new merch, new games, that's the first place you will hear about it. You can also reach out to me personally on Twitter at IsagamIKura, so if you have any questions or feedback or comments, that is the best way to reach out to me. My DMs are always open, so don't be a stranger and feel free to say hello. Now, with this being said, with this particular concern video that has been put in, basically putting everything on the front, share this around, unite the community, pass this around, tag anyone where possible that might even be remotely interested or even heard of Medarot, so they too can join in our voices and raise the voices to Imagineer and tell them, we feel you can do better. We love what you've been doing, but we have a concern that needs to be addressed, and we really can't let this be ignored. That being said, I did choose to highlight the official Medarot Twitter page and the official Medarot S page, as you see here, at Medarotters and at Medarot S. Both these pages are the official pages run by Imagineer for the series, so if you do have something that you want to reach out for them for, these are two of the best pages, as well as Imagineer's own handle on there as well, in order to even tag this video in or comment on them, or even send this to them and tell them, hey, we have concerns, and this is something that we feel you need to look at. But with all that being said, thank you again for stopping by, and I do appreciate you guys stopping in, sitting in for the long run. Like I said, this video is definitely a lot longer than most others I do on the norm, but I did feel that this needed to be discussed and talked about in order as a early warning, as a way to tell Imagineer, hey, we have concerns and they need looked at. With that being said, I do appreciate you guys for stopping by once again. If you'd like to know more, like I said, you can follow us on the links below. And it's always happy to have you in for a visit. Until next time.